$99 dynamic microphones. Which should you buy, the Rode PodMic or the new AT2040 from Audio-Technica? I'm finally reviewing both of these due to so much request from you all. I've never actually used the PodMic before, so we're finally reviewing that, and we're comparing it to Audio-Technica's new $99 entry. And this is really interesting because, at least for a generation of YouTubers and content creators, baby's first condenser mic was the AT2020, which was a wonderful value when you got it used, at least, for a condenser mic for a nice, warm, natural sounding voice, but not so great once we realized that desk setups are not well sound treated even when you try, and things like that. And some people upgraded to the 2035 and so on, but this is the 2040. Both of these microphones cost $99, but choosing which one you should buy is a little tough. This video is brought to you by CuriosityStream. Get access to my own streaming site, Nebula, when you sign up for CuriosityStream, linked below. I'm EposVox, the stream professor, and I have reviewed a wide gamut of microphones on my channel, both expensive and budget-oriented, and today we're looking at the slightly more budget-oriented category in the $100 price point for dynamic microphones. Just as a quick rundown, dynamic versus condensers. For example, the PodMic in the 2020, or 2040 rather, are dynamic microphones. The 2020 is a condenser microphone. Condenser microphones take phantom power and are activated by that power, and then pick up sounds based on that, and usually require less gain. Whereas dynamic microphones do not take phantom power, and they are more so activated by sound waves hitting the capsule themselves. That makes them more appropriate for desktop broadcast streaming environments, where even if you have sound foam tiles and sound blankets up, you still have desks and monitors and things that could reflect sound, and you also have sound generating devices like computers, keyboards, mice, and so on. So they're better at rejecting that sound, but they sound a little bit less natural and a little bit more radio-y. And so that is kind of the trade-off, but usually worth it here in these desktop streaming setups, which is kind of the context that we're reviewing it here for, not necessarily vocal booth voiceover or singing or anything like that. The PodMic showed up a little while ago, being kind of the king of the more budget-oriented dynamic mics because it's so small, although it is significantly heavy, and only costing $99 compared to more expensive options like, if you go really high, the SM7B or the Electro Voice RE20 being the $400-ish price point, or even Rode's own Procaster at the $200 to $300 price point here, which has been my favorite dynamic mic for a long time in terms of not the $400 price point. Specs-wise, these mics are kind of similar, but differ in some potentially important ways. The Rode PodMic is, of course, a dynamic cardioid microphone. It has a 20 Hz to 20 kHz range, which most of the microphones we look at tend to have. However, the AT2040 claims to be a hypercardioid pattern. We'll talk about those differences in a second, and I'm not sure that really matters in this context. But the frequency response range is 80 Hz to 16,000 kHz. So you're missing 4,000 Hz of range up at the top, and then you're missing 60 Hz of range at the bottom. And I think that really kind of impacts the sound here. Now, depending on your voice, and that's the unfortunate part about mic reviews, is I only have one voice and you need to compare to other people's different voice types, but that will have an impact on your voice. So first, let's talk about the polar patterns. So there's a bunch of different polar patterns a microphone can have. Specifically, we're looking at cardioid and what is claiming to be hypercardioid. Typically, this means that with cardioid, you have pickup in the front and then some rejection as it falls off to the back, and then it kind of comes in at the back. I'll show the images that are supposed to represent it here. Hypercardioid has a more refined pickup specifically in the front of the microphone, and then that falls off more significantly as you get to the sides, which means you will feel some coloration or some weirdness to your tone as you go off axis of the microphone, which it makes it more rejecting of background sound potentially, but also less flexible if you need to move around, which you might need to do in a desktop teaching, streaming, business call kind of setup. But as I move to the side of this microphone and then move over here and then move way over here, you might not notice that that really has a significant impact here. And when we get to our noise rejection tests, IMO, they perform fairly similarly. So I'm not sure that that difference in the pickup pattern truly matters. The frequency response here, I think, does play a role, as the differences between the PodMic and the AT2040 themselves really feel like they're involved with that. So in terms of powering these, I'm running both of these on the Go XLR, which is an audio interface mixer slash soundboard kind of thing together, but it's known for having fairly high quality, if not super characterized, preamps that can provide up to like 60 dB of high quality gain that are cleanly powers the SM7B and the RE20, which are hard to drive microphones. However, both of these microphones take 47 dB of gain from my Go XLR, and sometimes I still have to push it a little bit in post after that point unless you get right up on the microphone. So if you are eating the mic, you don't need quite as much gain, but if you are, I am, what, like 4 inches off of the mic here, I need 47 dB of gain, which means it's going to push cheaper interfaces and mixers quite a bit, and you may end up needing to invest in a mic activator like the Cloud Lifter or Fedhead in order to get that clean gain out of your interface, which is kind of wild. So I've recorded this whole video so far with the AT2040 unprocessed, completely raw. Now we have switched over to the PodMic, and I want to talk about some of the differences in their sound. In my testing the raw sound out of each, the PodMic tends to sound a little bit more thin. It sounds a little thinner, a little less warmth or bassy or like full as I prefer to sound with a lower register voice myself, whereas the AT2040 gets some of that thickness, for lack of a better word, back, but that comes at the cost of sounding a little bit muddy, and I think that comes from that frequency kind of mismatch. Now, I don't know exactly why Audio-Technica decided to have a frequency response that's chopped off compared to most microphones we look at. I have to imagine it comes in the form of like trying to add a convenient bass roll off or something through that 80 hertz cut effectively, but I don't like to do bass roll offs until about 60 or 50 hertz. Now, subjective decision, everyone does things differently, but I find if I cut higher than 60 hertz for a low or a high pass filter or a bass roll off or what have you, that you start to lose some of the natural oomph to my voice, and instead all of that sound pressure effectively gets put into the muddier ranges, which are slightly higher up, and that seems to be what I'm getting out of the AT2040 here. So the PodMic seems more emphasized on the higher end and is a little bit more thinner as a result, which doesn't sound as pleasing natively to my ears, whereas the AT2040 sounds a little bit more just naturally pleasing by having that warmth and that oomph to it, but it comes with the cost of muddiness, and you're not going to be quite as clear or crisp, which, depending on how you're mixing or EQing or what you're trying to balance it over top of in terms of background sound, the PodMic may be the better choice there. Or if you're just going for the sound itself, you may prefer how the AT2040 sounds and just need to make some EQ tweaks from there. However, both microphones seem to benefit from proximity effect, both in terms of gain and from getting that little bit of extra warmth. With the AT2040, that does kind of emphasize some of the muddier frequencies a little bit more, but it does still make it a little bit more pleasing, whereas with the Rode PodMic, it kind of compensates for that thinness by giving you some of that warmness back. So, the closer you can eat this microphone, the better. But not all of us want the microphone mounted directly up in our face, and so, Let's roll the comparisons between these two microphones, and then we'll talk about how it compares against some other similarly priced options. 3 rings for the Elven Kings under the sky, 7 for the Dwarf Lords in their halls of stone, 9 for the mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. 3 rings for the Elven Kings under the sky, 7 for the Dwarf Lords in their halls of stone, 9 for the mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all in the darkness bind them, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. Coming in for proximity effect, 3 rings for the Elven Kings under the sky, 7 for the Dwarf Lords in their halls of stone, 9 for the mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. Coming in up close for proximity effect, 3 rings for the Elven Kings under the sky, 7 for the Dwarf Lords in their halls of stone, 9 for the mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. Talking while typing, Box Royale switches. Talking while typing, mouse clicks, clicky mouse click. Talking while typing with Box Royale switches. Talking while typing, tippity tap, tip tap tap, clicking, click. All right. And our usual white noise test. We're currently in front of the microphone, around the side, behind, the side again, up top, down below, back in front, around the back. Yeah. And now our white noise test. We are in front of the microphone, around side of the microphone, around back, side, top, bottom, front. All right, next up, we're comparing to the Audio-Technica AT2040, the condenser microphone that some people are still upgrading from, apparently. The Rode Procaster, which, as I mentioned, is one of my favorite dynamic microphones. This one originally costs about $230, $250-ish new, depending on where you got it, sometimes $300, but can be had for as low as $180 used, and I always recommend buying microphones used when possible to keep the used gear market going, and because these things don't really go bad until you break them. We'll also compare to what is effectively the best microphone buy you can generally do, which is the Samson Q2U, about $80, $60, depending on where you're getting it. So cheaper than these two microphones. 3 rings for the Elven Kings under the sky, 7 for the Dwarf Lords in their halls of stone. 3 rings for the Elven Kings under the sky, 7 for the Dwarf Lords in their halls of stone, 9 for the mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. 3 rings for the Elven Kings under the sky, 7 for the Dwarf Lords in their halls of stone, 9 for the mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. 3 rings for the Elven Kings under the sky, 7 for the Dwarf Lords in their halls of stone, 9 for the mortal men doomed to die. 3 rings for the Elven Kings under the sky, 7 for the Dwarf Lords in their halls of stone, 9 for the mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. Talking while typing, tippity tip tip tap tap tap, clicky click 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 click. Tippity tip tip tap tip tip typing while talking, click click click, tippity tip tip tap. Talking while typing, tippity tip tap tap. And click 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 click. We've switched back to the AT2040, so I can tell you about my own streaming site where my videos are higher quality, uploaded early, so those of you who want to know where X review is or where Y review is, they're probably already up on my own streaming platform, and they're ad-free and often extended from the YouTube versions. The site is called Nebula, and we've partnered with CuriosityStream. Nebula features YouTube's top education creators such as MKBHD, Thomas Frank, and Lowspec Gamer. CuriosityStream saw what we were doing for educational content and wanted to partner up. We've worked out a deal where if you sign up for CuriosityStream linked in the video description below, you not only get access to their library of thousands of educational and documentary content, but you get access to Nebula for free for the entire duration of your CuriosityStream subscription. For a limited time, CuriosityStream is running 26% off sale of their annual plan, making it less than $15 per year for both CuriosityStream and Nebula. While you're there, check out Cat Nation to learn about the bizarre but unique world of Japanese cat culture. Head to curiositystream.com/epos for the best deal in streaming and get access to both sites for under $15 per year. Seriously, go do it now. Personally, the order that I feel these microphones come in terms of quality is the AT2040 is better than the Q2U by a little bit, just by having that more natural warmth, whereas there's always this like thin, there's a weird frequency that comes out with the Samson Q2U that is hard to like explain, but just sounds like a cheap dynamic microphone. But I still think the Q2U honestly sounds a little better than the Rode PodMic, and I know that may be controversial to say, but I think it sounds better, and then you combine that with the compelling value of it being XLR and USB, which allows you to use it twice on the same computer, use it as a sound card and an XLR mic, use it on 2 different computers, or as an upgrade path of starting with it as a USB mic and then upgrading to XLR hardware later. Still super compelling. However, of course, the Procaster sounds better than all of these out of the box. However, if you get really, really close on the microphones, I do think the Audio-Technica AT2040 gets bumped to the end of the chain in terms of quality because it brings out so much of that muddiness, so the Q2U and the PodMic end up sounding better than it. However, like I said, the Procaster I think sounds significantly better than the PodMic unless you get the PodMic right up on it, and then they get really close to how they sound together. But we're talking using the Procaster 6 or so inches away sounds like using the PodMic right up on it. So depending on your usability, that might not work out for you. Then of course you have the AT2020, which in terms of natural sound and warmth and clarity sounds better than all of them, but has significantly worse noise rejection due to being a condenser microphone than every microphone we have tested. I had a request to talk about post-processing for these microphones as the other reviews weren't focusing on it since I'm late to the party anyway. This is what I've got. So this first sample is the AT2040, and this is what it sounds like raw as I just played, but just so you're aware. 3 rings for the Elven Kings under the sky, 7 for the Dwarf Lord. So it's a little muddy, but lacking a little bit of warmth, but it has this weird frequency that I don't like. It's in their halls of stone, which is kind of like a nasally and boxy sound. So this is what it sounds like after I do a little EQing. 3 rings for the Elven Kings under the sky, 7 for the Dwarf Lords in their halls. Everyone's preferences on post-processing are different, blah, 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 but this is what I have felt sounds okay. 9 for the mortal men doomed to die. It still might be a little too much for some people, but this is what I've come up with the parametric EQ. I have here this curve, and I know this is kind of extreme, so I might reduce this a bit actually, because there's still like a little bit of harshness there. But basically what I'm doing, I'm rolling off at 60 hertz, even though it doesn't capture much below 80 anyway, but just to be safe in case I'm adding that back in. A little bit of boost at 125, because that's where my warmth lives for my voice. Cutting some of that muddiness that I complained about at 250. I do this on a lot of microphones. This one is no exception. Mids cut at 1000 hertz, but also a cut at 3200 hertz. So if we play it raw, stone, 9 for the mortal men. That little like higher end, just like harshness, I believe comes from this. So if I turn this off, Elven Kings under the sky, 7 for you can hear that like tinniness or boxiness, and that lives in this range right here. And so that's actually what I'm cutting out with this. The Dwarf Lords in their halls of... You lose some of that crispness, but you get clarity back so significantly. And if I sweep it here, stone, 9 for the mortal men doomed to die. Like I sound like a radio announcer. Lord on his dark throne. Ow! You can hear that super emphasized. So that's, you sweep up and down to see where that frequency is. So by knocking it down quite a bit, we're able to remove that extra, I guess it's supposed to be a presence boost. I don't like it. Then I have a low pass filter. I just run on everything. This guy, 7 for the... And then I have a boost over here, which is actually the same as the low pass filter, so it doesn't necessarily do a ton, but it builds up and then chops it off at the top. Again, we're only getting up to 16,000 kilohertz anyway, so if I kind of move this closer to that. 9 for the mortal men doomed. Again, I wouldn't necessarily boost this much overall, but this helps give some of that airiness or clarity back that we may be lacking. But overall, give it a little bit more warmth. And again, that's per my voice. EQing is going to be different for every voice. Cutting out the mids, cutting out the nasally frequencies, cutting out that weird presence boost that just sounds super harsh, and then trying to give a little bit more clarity or airiness back here. And that is the curve I'm using for the AT2040. Now for the PodMic, again, this is what it sounds raw. Under the sky, 7 for the Dwarf Lords in their halls of stone. Doesn't sound super muddy, but definitely sounds a little thin, a little bright. Not how I prefer my voice to sound, so this is where I've taken it. 3 rings for the Elven Kings under the sky, 7 for the Dwarf Lords in their halls of stone. It needs a de-esser. Not super thick still, but without going too overboard, I like how that sound. And that EQ looks like this. So fairly similar, but not quite as extreme. So we've still got the low cut filter. We've got the warmth being added in. And honestly, you might add a little bit more. I was just trying not to go overboard because there is really none on the PodMic. Cutting out less than on the AT2040 for the muddiness range at 250 hertz. You don't need a ton, but just a little touch helped. Cutting the mids significantly at 1000 hertz helps with that nasally frequency. So if I turn that off. Rings for the Elven Kings under the sky. 7 for the Dwarf Lords in their halls. Like you could take it or leave it. You may even just do less. But it just feels a little more right. And then once again, those gnarly frequencies living in that 3200 hertz range. And you can see here, it might actually be closer to 4 to 5K. If we play back here. Kings under the sky. 7 for the Dwarf Lords. You can kind of see it come back. In their halls of stone. 9 for the mortal men doomed to die. 1 for the Dark Lord. What if we actually move that over here to like 4 to 5K? On his dark throne. In the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all. 1 ring to... Okay, that's actually a little bit better here. So if we move our last cut over to the 4 to 5,000 hertz range here, that cuts out some of that harsh brightness that I was complaining about. We don't want to cut too much. We didn't need a ton like with the AT2040. For the Dwarf Lords in their halls of stone. But it makes it more clear without having that harsh, like, crunchy crispness that I don't like. So hopefully this helps you. As a last little silly comparison, I wanted to test out my new toy that I have here, which is the Soyuz Launcher. This is effectively kind of like a cloud lifter or a Fethead by being a microphone activator, but instead of providing clean gain, the goal is to provide some analog character to your sound with a hand-wound transformer inside to give it more character and specific, life and uniqueness rather than just boring clean gain. So I ran that with the PodMic and the AT2040 as well, and I think it helps the PodMic sound more thicker and better overall without any additional post-processing, but it mainly just highlights the boxy sound of the AT2040. Now just for fun, this is what the Rode PodMic sounds like running through the Soyuz Launcher, which is kind of like a cloud lifter or Fethead, but specifically adds some analog character to the sound. 3 rings for the Oven Kings under the sky, 7 for the Dwarf Lords in their halls of stone, 9 for the mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. This is the AT2040 run through the Soyuz Launcher. 3 rings for the Oven Kings under the sky, 7 for the Dwarf Lords in their halls of stone, 9 for the mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. In terms of which microphone you should buy, that's really tough. In terms of these two specifically, it's tough. Depending on how you process it, either are great and either are good choices. I will say in terms of mic arms, as I mentioned, the PodMic is significantly heavier than the AT2040, but the PodMic comes with a couple conveniences that most microphones don't, including the 2040, in that the threaded tap for it is both 5/8 inch and 3/8 inch, and it's not like a screw-in adapter that you're going to lose if you're not using it. It's just built into it, which is a lot more convenient, and the actual yoke here has a little adjustment knob, so you can continue to spin it even after your threading has maxed out, so you can get it as locked down tight on your mic arm as you like and still rotate the mic as you need. And the screw side yoke style kind of makes it a little more adaptive should someone make shock mounts or whatever for you. So personally, in terms of the raw out of box sound for my voice, I do prefer the AT2040. It still gives me that kind of feel, but I think with a little coaxing, with some EQ, both can sound fine. And depending on your voice, that thinness of the microphone might actually complement your voice better with the Rode PodMic. Both of them are great choices, and again, the Q2U in terms of raw value beats out any of these, so it's really tough. Hope this was helpful for you. Samples, of course, I always provide as clear and unedited as possible, so you can make the best microphone decision for you. Product links to everything down below will be linked, as well as a playlist with all of my microphone reviews in case you're curious how it compares to anything else I have touched and covered. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe for more tech education and stream guides. I'm EposVox, the Stream Professor. Remember, be kind, rewind.